Okay, folks, it's the second Wednesday of the month. I make that hashtag Webinar Wednesdays. My name's Summer Moisa. I'm the HR and Training Consultant with Schools Personnel Service, and as ever, joined by Elizabeth Mayhew.
Afternoon, everyone.
And we're here to take you through July's webinar, Developing Your HR and Training Plan. Now, firstly, a quick apology. Sorry we're not delivering this to you live. We've been called away elsewhere, but we didn't want to miss the opportunity to talk to our frequent flyers, our regular visitors and new folks that are joining us today and share advice and guidance with you. So thank you for watching this video, and we will see you again in September. Okay, with that said, let's get started and look to see what we're covering with you this afternoon.
Okay, so in terms of this afternoon, as always, a packed agenda for you. As Summer says, we're focusing on HR planning this month, and we'll open with a look at what HR planning is and the process and the place it will play in your school. We'll then move into looking at the planning process, and we've got a tool and a model to share with you to help you do that kind of planning and review exercise around your HR functions. We're then going to look at your current capabilities and explore future requirements, and again share some sort of tools and top tips for exploring those. We'll move on to look at how you might close any gap between your current capabilities and the future requirements, focusing in on a number of key HR strategies. And then we'll look at how you might plan and implement change and ensure that is successfully implemented in your school. And then we'll close with a look at some key HR activities in a kind of calendar format, so you can plan HR activities through the course of the year.
Absolutely, and we'll also give you a sneaky peek on next year's webinars and what you can expect for 2018-19. So stay with us, there's lots to cover. Okay, let's get started then with what is HR planning. Well, HR planning is sort of a rather large umbrella term actually for a number of activities, all of which we're going to take you through this afternoon. But in essence, it covers sort of 4 key areas, as you can see on screen there. So we're really interested in where are we going. So thinking about, as a school, what is it that you're wanting to achieve over the next year, 3 years, 5 years? I said school, that could be a trust. What is it you're wanting to achieve? Where are you going? Obviously, you'll rely on your school improvement plans, school development plans for that, as well as related business plans. Then thinking about understanding of the internal and external context that you're working within, and any factors that might be impacting your school either currently or have the potential to impact you in the future. So I guess it's a sense of where are we going and where are we now in terms of as a school, what's impacting you. And ultimately, HR planning is all about supporting you as a school or a trust to deliver on your goals and your operational needs, and very much having the right people with the right skills, very much in the right roles and the sort of right structure more broadly, in the right places at the right time. And there's some, as Liz says, some strategies and some tools that we're going to talk you through to help you in thinking about that, both strategically and also thinking about operationally as well, particularly in terms of HR and meeting those sort of short-term immediate needs that you might have. And then, of course, in terms of HR planning, absolutely planning for change. And certainly the buzzword at the moment within the business community is very much thinking about an agile business, having an agile workforce and the ability to better respond to the pace of change out there in the world, both the business sector, but clearly education is an environment where you know, there's a great pace of change in terms of policy developments and the needs of schools and the changing needs of students, so being as agile as possible. So in essence, that's sort of what we're focusing on with HR planning, and there's some key sort of elements to that planning process. So let's have a look at those now.
So ideally, your HR planning should be very much an ongoing and cyclical process, as you can see there on the diagram on screen. I guess there are 5 key elements to that planning process, and if we look at each one of those in turn. So I guess the first stage is about understanding and forecasting your future requirements. So having a think about your school context, any forthcoming changes, whether they be organisational, budgetary, staffing, or driven by legislative factors. How is your school likely to be changing over the next 12, 18 months? And what will that mean for the way your staff work and your skill mix and the staff that you need within your organisation? So the first stage is very much about forecasting those future requirements. And alongside that, you would want to be assessing your current capabilities. So what staff have you got in place? What are their skills? How are they deployed? What contracts do you use? Are you resourcing all services in-house, or are potentially some services outsourced? What are your capabilities and how are your staff deployed? And there are a couple of tools, that schools may want to have a look at in doing that assessment process.
So in terms of thinking about forecasting future requirements, there's a model from the business world called a PESTLE analysis, or you could change the letters around and make it steeple, whichever works for you. I probably first came across it as PESTLE, so I tend to stick with it that way. So the P of PESTLE is political factors that might be impacting on the school, either currently or certainly proposed in the future. So that would be changes in government policy, and there's certainly been a good number of changes to the world of education over the last sort of year, 18 months. The E would be economic factors, so clearly budget would fall under that. Certainly we've had the national funding formula, and for some schools their respective local authorities have had a bit of a staged approach to implementation, sort of a soft funding formula moving to sort of a hard application of that funding formula in the future to support that transition of one approach to the other. And of course, very timely in terms of this webinar, we're waiting with bated breath for the 2018 School Teachers Pay Terms and Conditions document. Obviously that will have an impact on budget and the economic position of your school. The S is social factors, so that could be demographics of your pupil and wider sort of school community, so thinking about projected pupil numbers and impact there. Could also relate to the demographic of your staffing complement as well, and thinking about sort of localised issues relating to recruitment and retention, issues that you might be facing, or either now or potentially in the future. The T of PESTLE is technological, so there I suppose potentially thinking about impact on provision. Possibly some changes recently in terms of curriculum and embedding technology there. Could potentially relate again to staffing issues. Certainly a big focus in the business world at the moment is around flexible working, certainly home working, and having the technological capability to think about that agile workforce that can be working in different ways and be as best able as possible to respond to changing need. The L is legal considerations, and again quite timely. In May there was a little old thing called GDPR, so clearly that was a big shift in the legal landscape around data protection, and we've all needed to look at our policies and procedures and ways of working in order to comply there. And employment law is ever changing, April and October being key dates within the annual calendar for new employment law legislation. And finally, the E, final E, being environmental. So again, that could be related to sort of the wider community, or that could be related to, I suppose, your school site and school environment. So if you're projecting an increase in pupil roll, then clearly you're going to need an environment that can support that and sustain that over time. So I guess thinking those issues through. Another model that could be useful to you is a SWOT analysis, and this would support assessing current capabilities. If it's not something that you're familiar with, SWOT analysis, the S stands for strengths, so assessing your current capabilities as an organisation. Now, you could do this on a number of levels. It could be assessing the strength of your budget, it could be assessing the strength of your sort of wider resources and organisational capabilities. But given that we're focusing here on HR planning, the S could be assessing the strengths of your respective staff teams, so strengths within your governing body. Strengths within your leadership team, middle leaders, upper pay range, middle pay range teachers, assessing the strengths within your classroom support staff, as well as your wider support staff groupings. And clearly appraisal discussions and documentation can support that sort of assessment. And looking at those groups of staff both as individual groups, but also bringing all of that information together collectively and understanding what are our sort of accumulative strengths within our school, and how can we best capitalise on those, maximise those and position those to help you move forward as you drive towards your school improvement goals. The W of SWOT is weaknesses, which sounds a little bit perhaps a little bit negative, but to change it to a D of development, it doesn't quite have the same, it doesn't quite come across in the same way. It's not as neat then as SWOT, is it? S dot, I guess. So anyway, the D being development. So what are the development needs of, again, those respective groups of staff? In doing so enables you to identify the gaps within those staff groups, but also the cumulative gaps across the school, and being able to think then about stretching your CPD budget as far and as best as possible to meet those gaps. And if there are similar development needs across those different groups of staff, then you'll have immediately highlighted opportunities for whole school training, so that you absolutely can be maximising that budget, rather than potentially replicating training, because here's a training session for our teachers, here's a training session for governors, and vice versa, but actually being able to identify those opportunities to have sort of whole school initiatives and maximise your budget in doing so. The O is opportunity, so thinking about where are our opportunities here in terms of staffing, and I guess opportunities would lend itself to thinking about talent management and succession planning, opportunities to make use of individual staff members and being able to grow your own talent and grow your own leaders for the future. We pick up on succession planning a bit later. And finally, the T of SWOT being threats. So that could be in relation to localised recruitment and retention stresses and strains that you might be feeling within your school, whether that's sort of because of your geographical base, or whether that's because of what you notice in terms of your retention rates. If that identifies any trends, then clearly that's a threat that you need to think about, and how can we look to overcome that issue. So hopefully 2 models there that could be really useful in unpicking future requirements and things that could impact, and also assessing your current capabilities.
Yes, so they're really great tools, aren't they, for folks to have a look at and have a think about in terms of analysing where they are and their current capabilities. The third stage in that planning process cycle builds from understanding where you are and looks to the future in terms of where do you want to be. So what are your future requirements, and crucially what gaps there are between where you are currently as a school in terms of your staffing, the deployment, the complement of staff, and where you're going to need to be in the future to meet your future requirements. So that gap analysis stage is absolutely critical, and we've got some self-reflection questions that we'll share with you on the next slide to help you understand that. So once you understand where you are, where your gaps are, the next stage is to develop appropriate HR strategies to address these. And clearly there are a range of different HR strategies that you may choose, and the appropriateness may vary depending on your circumstances. But in terms of strategies, we're talking about things relating to workforce planning, potentially your succession planning, recruitment and retention initiatives, training and development initiatives, or initiatives relating to reward and recognition of your staff. But critically, the nature of those strategies is going to be determined by your requirements and the gaps you currently have. And then the final stage in the planning process is that planning and the implementation and evaluation of that change. So obviously you would want to make sure that any change, particularly involving changes to staff, is well planned and well introduced, and that the effectiveness of any changes are evaluated, so you make sure that in the changes you're delivering on your future needs and the future requirements of the school.
Absolutely. So let's look to unpick this model a little bit further, and let's have a look at forecasting sort of future requirements and current capabilities. What you can see on screen there is our rather colourful school context bingo card. We use this in a couple of our training sessions, our pay policy workshop and characteristics of an effective appraisal policy. And in essence, what we were looking to do was to provide just a nice visual representation of the sorts of issues and factors that will no doubt be impacting schools in different ways, and that's the context that you're working within. And it's really important to undertake a level of analysis as much as is possible and sort of meaningful for you, to understand the issues at play, because there's no one size fits all. It really is on determining where are we at and what's the best approach, the right solution for us moving forward, rather than lifting any model, policy, procedure, way of working off the shelf. It's about making it fit for purpose for you and the context that you're working in. So some interesting thoughts there for you on screen. In terms of closing the gap, so having looked at those requirements, as Liz mentioned, some self-review questions there for you. So what vulnerabilities do we have in our staffing structure? A useful question to ask to understand those issues. What are the sort of threats? Again, we're with the SWOT analysis with that one. Are our staff deployed in ways in which we can meet our future needs? And if not, then that's going to need to be a focus. Do our staff have the skill sets we need moving forward? So again, linking in with information that you'll gain from the appraisal process. Are our current staffing practices adequate for future needs? Is the structure financially viable over the longer term? Obviously, that's an ever pressing consideration. Do we have scope for flexibility? Are there alternative ways of delivering our services? I know a number of schools and authorities recently have been doing a lot of work around mapping, revisiting sort of remapping sort of curriculum planning and trying to better align staffing complement to deliver on the curriculum. So just re-envisaging roles and starting with a blank piece of paper and thinking, okay, have we got the right people in the right roles at the right time? Within sort of secondary, some colleagues in Hertfordshire revisiting the perhaps traditional view that pastoral roles needed to be delivered by teachers, qualified teachers. Actually, could those roles be delivered either in the same, similar, or perhaps wholly appropriate alternative ways, but by support staff, freeing those teachers to focus their time and efforts in other ways, and equally utilising the support staff and the skills of support staff in a different way. So the opportunity to think those things through. What staff changes will we need to make? And clearly, in all of this, thinking about what are our priorities. And there's a key point there in reflecting on what are our priorities. And another little model there for you on screen. When you're reflecting on your priorities, really important to think about impact. What's going to have the biggest impact? And not to get potentially sidetracked, or possibly, worse still, demotivated by focusing on blind alleys, things that actually take a lot of work to implement, but actually are having very little impact, where you want to focus yourselves. And we've done a little bit of a traffic light sort of colour sequencing exercise there, is thinking about what are those activities that are relatively low effort, so things that are easy to do, that are going to have a high impact, the master strokes. Put those things in place, because you and the staff and the school as a whole will gain in confidence from that and see the value of those activities, and it will create a positive buzz. Equally focus on those quick wins, things that are easy to do, not so much impact, but you can get a good number of those in action and in place, and again the positivity that comes from that. Then there's the slow burns, the things that are high impact, but they're a little bit more challenging to put in place, require a bit more effort, a bit more thinking about, or sort of chess. You need to align a few more pieces together to implement those things, but nonetheless focus on them. And as I say, do be careful to not fall into chasing those blind alleys, putting lots and lots of effort into activities that actually aren't having that significant an impact, when you could be focusing your attention elsewhere on that model there. So again, I hope that's useful to think about and help you in focusing your time and your efforts and that of colleagues within the school. Another thing to think about then is developing HR strategies. And clearly, once you've thought about where you're going, where you're at now, where the gaps are, what are our priorities, it's highly likely that you're going to need to be thinking about your HR strategy and sort of related policies and procedures and practices, and be reviewing those, refining those, potentially rewriting those and refocusing those documents. With all your HR strategies, they absolutely should align to the school improvement plan. It should all support that drive to where you're going, your school improvement priorities. But they should also align with your plans for teaching and learning, your objectives for teaching and learning, and of course should be financially viable. So align with your sort of financial strategies. So the sorts of staffing strategies that you might be thinking about is workforce planning, succession planning, being able to grow your own talents. Recruitment and retention, we know, is a national issue, and certainly is an issue locally here in Kent, as it will be no doubt elsewhere. And certainly training and development, important strategies, and reward and recognition. And I guess just to highlight the importance of that alignment, in determining an approach to reward and recognition, you absolutely would want that to be financially viable, and you would want to make sure that you're rewarding and recognising the right behaviours and the right sort of impact on teaching and learning. So it really is important that those policies are fully aligned and working collectively to support the school's improvement priorities. So we now are going to take you through those staffing strategies in a little bit more detail. So let's have a look at workforce planning.
Okay, so what is workforce planning? I guess it's a bit of an umbrella term that can encompass a number of different activities, and we've tried to capture the key elements there on the slide for you. I guess it's very much about taking time out to reflect on your staff, how they're deployed, their skill levels, the nature of their contracts, and having a think about, could we do things differently? Could we do things better to meet the operational needs of our school going forward? In terms of kind of key areas to explore, I think absolutely clearly defined job roles and accountabilities are key. So when you're recruiting for a role, it's really important to take the time out to reflect on what you need in the future. And with roles that have been in place for a long time, it's equally important and valuable to review what the individuals are doing and what the role encompasses, to make sure that those roles are truly fit for purpose and reflecting the needs of your school. Likewise, another element of workforce planning might be to take a look at your contracts, the contract types that you use in your school. What's your mix of part-time, term time only, relief, temporary, casual contracts? Are they appropriate to your needs? Are there ways in which you can work smarter in the way that contracts are constructed? Are there long-running contracts that could benefit from being reviewed? Are you using a lot of relief staff? Might you work in a different way to cut down on the use of relief? One change we're seeing more and more is that you might in your school have an employee with a part-time contract that's a permanent contract, but then in addition to that, they may have temporary additional increases in hours on that contract to meet specific short-term needs. And that's the way you can ensure greater flexibility and agility in terms of how your staff are deployed. The other elements of workforce planning you might want to consider very much relates to your teaching team and what it is they're doing and what you might expect a leadership teacher to be doing compared to someone on the upper pay range and compared to someone who maybe was in receipt of a TLR. Are they really undertaking accountabilities that are appropriate to the nature of those roles and are delivering on key priorities for you as a school? In some schools, it might be a good opportunity to review the size and deployment of your leadership team. If you're in a larger school, it might be historically that you have a large leadership team. Does that need another look? Could those accountabilities be shared in another way? Could you be deploying some of those accountabilities to teachers in other roles within the team? All things to consider and think about. And then in terms of the deployment of support staff, are your support staff working in roles and in ways that are really kind of supporting the operation of the school? Some has already mentioned the way pastoral services are delivered in schools, and historically that might be an accountability that was undertaken by a member of the teaching team. Could those pastoral responsibilities be devolved to support staff working in a kind of new and different roles? All elements that you may want to consider in terms of future planning and making sure you've got a flexible and agile workforce.
Absolutely, and I think the other point, Liz, and I'll be honest with folks, it's just come to mind, is also thinking about the whole wellbeing agenda, and particularly thinking about workload for teachers as well.
Absolutely.
So certainly the DFE are undertaking a number of sort of programmes of work reflecting on and looking at the issue of workload for teachers and within education. And we'll wait to sort of see their findings, but certainly something for schools to think about in terms of workforce planning and thinking about staffing structures, the right people, right roles with right skills is thinking about issues around workload because of the impact that has on well-being, recruitment and retention, certainly within the teaching profile. So yeah, just an added thought there, but some really useful stuff for you to be thinking about. So that's workforce planning, and we promised you that we'd talk through all these areas. So let's now move to succession planning. And again, another little sort of model or process chart, some key questions that you can see there on screen. So succession planning is making sure that you have been able to identify the business critical roles in your school. So what are the roles that your school could absolutely not do without, that a business could absolutely not do without? I can think of two off the top of my head. That one, of course, now having mentioned GDPR, here's a second mention, is in terms of the data protection officer is a statutory role. That is an absolutely critical role. You have to have a DPO in place. That doesn't have to be a standalone role, but in terms of sort of standalone job description, but it is a role within school that is statutory. You have to have that role, so it is business critical. And another role actually that's come about more recently is the careers leader role. So somebody having those responsibilities to look at careers provision in line with the government's careers strategy. So those certainly would be two business critical roles. And clearly, again, how things shift and change over time with new legislation and new policy updates. So identify those business critical roles. Are there individuals in your teams, either within your school or your wider partnerships, if you're part of a trust or foundation, etc., who could be developed to fill those future roles. Consider their current performance and skills. Also, I suppose thinking about their own desire to progress, to develop, and absolutely you could be looking to structure appraisal around supporting that development and making it all the more targeted and focused. So alongside sort of motivation, do they have the required behaviours and mindset, either in terms of current ability or the potential to develop that? And as I say, appraisal can support that moving forward. And be thinking about when will they be ready immediately, within 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, and then you can absolutely be focusing that development. If you haven't been able to identify people internally, whether that's to your individual school or across your wider network, whether that's formal network in terms of a trust or wider network in terms of sort of collaborations that you work with, then it's going to be considering other strategies to ensure that you have the right future workforce. So again, we might be back to thinking about Liz's thoughts around workforce planning and thinking about, do we need to think about alternative contract types, flexing the sorts of contracts that we have so that we could fulfil those roles perhaps in a different way, maybe on a temporary basis or a secondment basis, thinking about developing staff into those roles. So something to think about there with succession planning. That's that. So let's have a look then at recruitment and retention. There's so much to share with you this afternoon. Okay. Keep moving on.
So, of course, you'll be fully aware of some of the recruitment and retention pressures that schools are facing, particularly around teaching roles and particularly in certain geographical areas and particularly around certain subject areas. I guess in terms of thinking about recruitment and retention, it's always going to be more than pay. Obviously, pay is one part of the employment package or the employee value proposition, and it's absolutely right that you give good consideration to pay to make sure the pay your staff are receiving is fair and competitive in the local marketplace. But beyond that, I think we're learning more and more about how there are other elements of that employee package that are absolutely critical for individuals in making their decision, firstly to come to your school and then equally to stay in your school. And we tried to capture some of those key elements on the slide there for you. And it might be, at first glance, surprising that some of these things form part of that total employee package. But I think what we're learning more and more from research, particularly research that DfE is undertaking currently, is the value that staff place on non-financial rewards, particularly around things like career progression opportunities and CPD and the work environment, and as Summer alluded to, the work-life balance, workload issues. All of those factors can support an individual in deciding to apply to your school and then crucially remaining with you. I think what we're seeing nationally, or what we've heard of nationally, is that within the first few years of teaching, there's quite a significant drop-off amongst newly qualified teachers, particularly from year sort of 3 to 5 within their career, where teachers are more likely to leave the profession. Is there anything in your employee package that you could do to retain those individuals at that point in their career?
Yeah, absolutely, and certainly that's the national picture. But remembering, if you've done your PESEL and your SWOT analysis for your individual school, and you understand what those recruitment and retention issues are like specifically to your setting, your geography, your context, then you can absolutely reflect on these issues specifically to your staffing complement. And it's quite legitimate that you would have an overall sort of whole school employee value proposition sort of package, but absolutely the opportunity, again, I suppose being agile to continue to use that word, is to tweak it for particular groups of staff. So actually, if your retention issues are all around your sort of leadership team, then you might have a particular focus on how can we further develop our package, wanting to attract leaders, or wanting to ensure that we retain those and develop our middle leaders into senior leadership team into the senior leadership team. So again, we're thinking back to succession planning as well. So it's really useful to think about the whole package, not just pay. And whilst pay is important, and I wouldn't in any way look to pretend that it isn't, it is only one factor. And actually, in terms of all the theories around motivation, it is only one factor. And actually, it is about those non-tangible I say rewards, those non-tangible elements, and certainly some of the latest research that I'm reading on and hearing about at the moment. It's very much talking about how we have moved into a purpose-driven economy, and it's very much about finding purpose within your world of work, and certainly thinking about job satisfaction, well-being, culture and ethos, finding purpose in what you do, which is perhaps good news given that finances are so challenging within the education sector. There's lots that you can do in and around the confines of pay.
I think it's about identifying that unique selling point for your school, which will attract and retain staff, accepting that there are going to be limits around what you can do in terms of monetary reward, but what else can you offer your staff?
Absolutely. And critically, making sure that you're communicating that first and foremost in terms of recruitment, absolutely selling your employee value proposition as part of the recruitment exercise, but equally finding opportunities to continually reaffirm the value of working within your organisation to existing staff, so that they're not only engaged and motivated, but they're also champions of your organisation as well. So hopefully some useful thoughts there. And of course, with any of this, this is only a quick webinar. If you need sort of help and advice around sort of implementing these things, exploring these issues, then you know where we are. Okay, conscious of time, let's keep things moving on. So training and staff development then. Absolutely, training and staff development should be aligned to both the organisation, so thinking about the school development plan or school improvement plan, and your plans for succession, your succession planning, as well as the individual, so thinking about their role, thinking about their aspirations and motivations, and of course their career path. So wanting to align those things together. And do consider what's known as the 70-20-10 principle. It's proportionate, but there's a rule of thumb that says that absolutely 70% of an individual's development can absolutely come from experience. Getting involved in projects, direct work experience, delivery, learning and delivery on the job. 20% proportionately from exposure, following the theme of 3 E's there. Exposure, so thinking about networking, thinking about learning from others, thinking about, in terms of networking, actual networks as well as virtual networks, so online forums, platforms, knowledge sharing, websites, etc. Coaching, mentoring, that sort of thing also would fall under that. And 10% being from formal education, and actually the opportunity for, if you're focused on experience, somebody to gain experience of, say, something like project management, getting involved in supporting with a project to whatever extent or sort of remit is appropriate for where they're at, and what's needed in terms of their development. There's no reason why, if needed, that can't follow up with then getting involved in a more involved project, shadowing maybe a senior leader to gain more experience and exposure. And finally, if there is a need for formal qualification, to follow that up with training, but with the added benefit that when the trainer is talking about sort of theories and models and frameworks of working, the member of staff has experience on which to hang those theoretical hats in terms of, yes, I did that, and I can see how that theory and that model works out in practice, or I didn't do that, and actually I can see how that would have been advantageous and would have supported me with that project or with that piece of work. So there's a number of benefits to working in that way. And again, want to talk that through some more? Well, I love training, so I will happily talk to folks about it. But for now, let's look to keep things moving. And where are we next, Liz?
Reward and recognition.
Aha.
So this is the final workforce strategy that we just wanted to touch on today. And again, there are numerous elements to reward and recognition. And I think it's important, as we've said previously, to set this in the context of the fact that budgets are stretched. Funding is limited. So in terms of pay, your options around pay may be limited, but there are some things you can think about critically around how you're using performance-related pay in your school. You'll be aware that both for support staff and for teaching staff, there is performance-related pay. Are you really using that to its optimum? Are you really rewarding and awarding pay progression for those individuals who deserve it most? Are your pay policies and your pay frameworks flexible enough to ensure that you're rewarding those people who are really adding most to the school? I guess alongside the use of performance-related pay, there's a few other pay considerations for you around sort of flexible allowances, so the use of recruitment and retention payments for teachers. Are these being used appropriately and at the right point in the individual's career to either recruit or retain them? Thinking more broadly, in terms of other allowances for teachers, again, do you have TLRs? Are you using those appropriately? Are they assigned to the right kind of responsibilities? Are you making sure people who are doing those additional TLR roles are really contributing in the way you might like? And are they being rewarded appropriately for that? And then in terms of support staff, having a think about flexibilities around their pay. And I guess the key flexibility there is a cash award. So recognising that an individual who goes above and beyond the day-to-day job in a way that you wouldn't reward through performance-related pay, it may be appropriate to reward them through a one-off cash award. And then on the other side of the pay and reward seesaw, if you like, are those kind of non-pay recognition activities that you might want to consider. And I think, again, going back to your employee value proposition, this is something that is often overlooked, but actually staff can really, really value. So something as simple as a thank you, recognition for a job well done, can be really motivating and really engaging for staff. And we've put a couple of other suggestions in terms of those non-pay activities, time off, tokens of appreciation, staff events and activities, all elements to that kind of total employment package that can balance maybe some of the difficult decisions you're having to make around pay and pay progression.
Absolutely. So yes, do think about those non-pay rewards because they could be just as rewarding for the individual as the organisation in terms of helping you, deliver on your responsibilities as an employer, have a healthy and happy workforce, and also hopefully a healthier and happier budget as well. It's not all about pounds and pence. Let's take a quick look then at planning and the implementation of change.
Yeah, so just a word on planning and implementation. And I guess the implementation may vary depending on the nature of the change that you're looking for. But on the slide there, we've tried to capture some key elements in that implementation process. And I think starting at the top there, that senior stakeholder buy-in and approval is absolutely critical with any change activity, whether that be restructuring your staff or looking at alternative ways of rewarding and recognition of staff. It's about getting that agreement from the top, from your governors, from your SLT, that everyone's on board with this change, the need to make change and the benefits that change will bring for the organisation. So once you've got that buy-in, then it's very much about selling and communicating that vision to the wider team, having early conversations with those individuals affected, explaining what the changes will entail and the impact they will have on individuals. Obviously, the ideal position with any change is that staff will agree to that, and there'll be a position where you're in mutual agreement to any change. And an important part of securing that mutual agreement is the stage where you're really addressing concerns and removing obstacles, so understanding what staff are feeling about the proposed changes and answering the questions and queries they might have in relation to that. Of course, it may not always be possible to effect change through that mutual agreement process. And if that's the case, you may be looking at formal consultation, and we can support you with any more formal exercises. And certainly that level of consultation would be required if you're looking at any restructure of your staff team. And then the final stage in that implementation may involve issuing notice, but it may not be required in all instances. So again, we can guide and support you through that.
Absolutely, we can guide and support you through that whole process, and particularly in terms of communicating your vision, the opportunity to support and coach you in terms of thinking about strategies to support you in communicating your vision and communicating change. There are a number of sort of strategies that folks can use to support with that.
Just one final thought there in relation to notice periods and recruitment windows, the absolute importance of allowing for sufficient lead-in time when you're planning for change. As we all know, schools are cyclical organisations, and there are certain points or windows in the year where you might be working towards implementing change, and we'd want you to make sure you have enough lead-in time to kind of achieve those.
So what we're saying is we're here and happy to help. So do make use of us. This last slide, just very quickly, because it's there on screen and I'll give you a few moments to have a look at it. Some key HR activities at a glance. I suppose a bit of a ready reckoner of some of the key activities that you'll no doubt be mindful of, be undertaking through the year. But of course, you can add to this locally in terms of things that specifically you do, are required to do within your schools, settings or larger organisations if you're part of a trust. So just give you a few moments, conscious that this is a pre-recorded video, for you to just have a quick look at the items there. Okay, lovely. Just thought we'd give you a bit of opportunity to look at that. And finally then, some exciting things ahead for next year. By next year, we all know I mean September. The next school year. 2018-19 is fast approaching, folks. So future webinars then, what are we going to be covering? Well, September is going to be key changes to teachers' pay terms and conditions in line with the new STPCD document, which, as I say, we're waiting to be released in coming days. We also have a special event this year, really excited about this one. We're going to have a special webinar on managing cancer in the workplace. It's a partnership with Macmillan Cancer Support, and it's aligned to the Macmillan Coffee Morning. So it's going to take place on the morning of the 28th of September, in line with Coffee Morning, and we'll be covering that very important subject with our friends from Macmillan. So if you can join in with that, that'd be great. October, as usual, normal part of the calendar for us, an employment law update with Invicta Law, because October is one of those key points in the year alongside April where we find out the latest in developments in that area. November, we're going to be joined by our local LADO here in Kent and have a look at the LADO role and their work. I think that could be really useful, particularly we're seeing sort of an increase in investigations where as HR we're needing to support schools with these more complex, more serious investigations, and certainly I think an understanding of the LADO role and their work is useful. And then December, we're going to be focusing on promoting and supporting wellbeing in the workplace, as well as we'll take a quick look at what's coming on board for 2019. And certainly if you have been struck by the themes that we've been talking about today and thinking about employee value proposition and your full offer and the issues around wellbeing and supporting that, then you might want to get yourselves on our website and register early for our December webinar. We'd love to see you there. In terms of our webinars, you can register for individual webinars if a topic takes your fancy, or you can certainly register for the whole series. We'll be happy to see you at any and all events. And I suppose just finally to say that all dates for our 2018-19 training calendar, our face-to-face training, are all available online. promoted via our website, but also available on CPD online as well. Get yourselves on our website, have a look at our New Look website and brochure, and if there's anything there that's of interest, then follow the relevant links, and we'll see you soon. Thank you for joining us today. So sorry that we couldn't do this live, but absolutely we wanted to share what is, I think, important advice and guidance with you. So here's to planning ahead for 2018-19, and we look forward to seeing you again then. Have a lovely summer in the meantime, and I guess it's goodbye from me and goodbye from...
Goodbye from me. Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.